you doing, everybody? This is your fellow Beatlemaniac, Steve Ludwig, welcoming you to another edition of the Beatles Hour with Steve Ludwig, right here at planetludwig.com. Here we are, show number 83, and oh my goodness, I have been so lucky over the years on my Beatles Hour show and my classic pop culture show to have interviewed so many brilliant people, and boy oh boy, right up there is today's guest, LAURIE Kaye, the author of the book Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, My Life Leading Up to John Lennon's Last Interview, is just a brilliant book. LAURIE has spent her life in radio and music, interviewing so many people. She's written this brilliant book, and she takes us right up to the afternoon of December 8th, 1980, when all of us know that terrible, fateful day when John was brutally murdered right outside the Dakota building where he lived, when he and Yoko lived. And LAURIE was in the Dakota building interviewing John and Yoko that afternoon, mere hours before John was taken from us. And I can't wait to play the interview for you, which we did 3 days before this opening. So why don't I just stop the talking and let LAURIE tell the story. There's so much to this full life that LAURIE has led so far. So, Steve, please stop talking and let's get right to our great guest, LAURIE Kaye. And here we are, joined by the author of this magnificent book, Miss LAURIE Kaye. LAURIE, thank you so much. I know you're so busy with all these promo meetings and all with the book. Thank you for finding time for us.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm great.
I love the book. I'm so glad that you're here. And I thought before I start with all my questions, I have plenty of questions for you as a fellow music maniac. But why don't you, for those who haven't had the chance to read this brilliant book yet, could you just give us a little background, how it came about, and generally what's in the book?
Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, My Life Leading Up to John Lennon's Last Interview, is the story of my early rock radio related life and career wrapped around what tragically turned out to be John Lennon's last day on the planet, December 8th, 1980, which is the day that me and my RKO radio team were at the Dakota conducting his what turned out to be tragically his final interview. And he was shot and killed mere hours after our interview ended. And that's probably the major reason why I felt so horrible all these years ever since. It'll be 45 years. The anniversary is this December 8th coming up. And I still feel like it's the best and worst day of my life in so many ways.
We're gonna lead up to that day. I from you saying it was the best and worst day of your life, I mean, I can only imagine what you're going through because as fans, I mean, it absolutely destroyed everyone. But you were with the man. You were with John just a mere, like you said, hours before he was so brutally murdered. Um, but what led up to this? That's if I were to have a picture with John Lennon and Yoko, and if I were to write a book about music and this, of course I would put him on the cover. But I want to make a point to our listeners and our viewers that there is so much more in this book. It's like a music history of the 70s and 80s. Feel that?
Well, absolutely. I did a lot of interviews, but my very first Beatles special, the RKO radio special that I wrote, which was the longest Beatles special ever created in the United States, was originally 14 hours long and called The Beatles from Liverpool to Legend, and was released to radio stations on
Ooh.
tapes. And this is one of the The tape,
Very.
uh, yeah, you can actually see the tape inside too.
Boy,
I
look
have
at
all the
that.
originals. And the thing is that it was so popular after the first year it aired, that was starting in 78, that it got internationally syndicated. So we got to expand it and to 17 hours. So I had a lot more writing and co-producing to do. And we got to change the title to the original one I'd come up with that I wanted to use, which was The Beatles from Liverpool to Legend. And it was extremely popular, especially in England. And years later, when I interviewed George Martin, the Beatles producer, he told me that it was the best Beatles special he'd ever heard. And it made me feel so great.
And that's something I assume he doesn't throw around saying that. And I must agree with him, boy. It just stands out. Anything Beatles special you think of, it's the your RKO interview.
It was great. And it was a lot of work. And it took me days and nights. And I also had the full-time job at KFRC Radio, the RKO station in San Francisco. So I was working there during the day, and then any minutes I had free, I would be working on the Beatles special, and then I'd be staying there all night instead of going back to my apartment where I was living and working on it. And basically, that was another episode of sex and drugs and rock and roll in my
Right.
life.
I mean,
Because
most, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there.
Okay, so I was going to say because it was drugs that kept me able to work 24 hours a day a lot of the time.
I guess it helped too that you were a young lady full of vim and vigor too, and you were probably just let's go because funny, you and John had something quite in common. You both came from dysfunctional families, may I put it that way?
Absolutely, it's true. Neither of us were raised by our mother and father. We weren't raised by our actual parents. It's weird, and it's just one thing that we had in common.
And that kind of that dysfunction, I guess, in your life, your family life, kind of led you to kind of wanderlust a little bit and look for things. And is that what eventually led you to the radio?
Well, yes, because the reason that I listened to rock and roll music even before I was a toddler was because of my dysfunctional family upbringing and violent mother. So, what I would do is kind of escape basically into the bedroom or even the living room with a transistor radio plugged in my ears, and I would listen to the top AM stations in LA at the time. And it was KHJ and KRLA. And it was incredible because I was listening to everybody from Little Richard to Elvis Presley to Chubby Checker. And it
Yeah.
was just so amazing. And then the Beach Boys, and then eventually the Beatles. And
Mhm.
then, of course, I went to FM radio as I got in junior high and high school, and that was really cool. And the FM radio station that I listened to in LA, where I grew up, because I'm a SoCal gal, was KMET FM, which was incredible. And I won a lot of things by calling in on the radio station, which I have in my book. And one of the most incredible things I won was front row tickets to my very first Rolling Stones concert, which was the Rolling Stones Nicaragua benefit at the Forum here in LA. And it was really cool because when my date that I asked to go with me, my friend from high school, Mark, took me to the station to pick up the tickets for the show that night, I thought, oh, I'll just walk in the office and pick them up. But then when I walked in the office, they said, no, the disc jockey wants you in his booth to talk to you on the air. And I was excited, and because it was B. Mitchell Reed, otherwise known as the Beamer, who was one of my very favorite disc jockeys. And he asked me my name and my age and a couple other questions. And then after I answered him, he said, you know, Laurie, you should definitely consider an on-air radio career because you have a great voice and you talk great, you have great things to say. And so I immediately thought, Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to work towards. So that was the very first step in getting me into my radio career.
And he was so right because you have a great FM voice. I must say, you're just perfect for the sound that you emit. That's kind of crazy way of putting it, but you have a great voice.
Well, thank you. That's so cool to hear because then later, several years later, when I was a student at UC Berkeley in the journalism school, one of the professors that I had, after I gave him another article that I'd written for class, he said, Laurie, why are you taking a class? You already know how to be a news writer. You don't need to be in school. Go get an internship and you'll immediately get a job and you can quit school. You can start making money. And so I thought, wow, that's great. And I went to go look at the journalism department office, and they had lists of internships. And it wasn't just newspapers, they had one for KFRC AM radio news department. They wanted their very first intern there. And I thought, wow, how cool. So I applied, I was immediately accepted, and they liked me right away, my writing ability, and I started doing specials for them, and they were just amazed, and they gave me a job right away so I could quit school, and I became the news editor there. And the minute I got that news editor job, that's when I was also hired to write RKO Presents the Beatles. So it all paid off very fast thanks to winning those Rolling Stones tickets.
Yeah. Oh, what was it like sitting there in the front row, your first Rolling Stones concert?
It was amazing because not only were the Stones great when they finally got on stage and started playing, but they looked great because Mick Jagger was starting to dress like David Bowie and
Oh,
really looked cool. They all did. And my friend Mark, who was my date that night, was a good photographer and he took a lot of pictures. So I still look at them and remember them. And there's, of course, one in my book as well,
yes.
so people can see that. And it was one of my all-time favorite Rolling Stones concert, and I've seen them plenty of times since. And most recently, I saw them right before their drummer died
Charlie.
here in Southern California in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl, and that was an incredible show too. So they were always great seeing them live in concert.
You mentioned how well your writing was respected also. I found that in your book, Laurie. It's great because I think rightfully so, the cover certainly draws people in, right? But once I got into the book, I loved the way you very deftly never let us really forget that, hey, listen, I'm getting to John, I'm getting to Paul, I'm getting to George. You give us little tidbits here and there, but then we're always back into the real meat of it too, the music scene. And I think that was such a clever way of just kind of never letting us forget what's still to come after all this great meat that we're reading in the book. It's just lovely the way we go back and forth.
Thank you. And thank you for being so complimentary about my book and the review that you did too.
Oh, that was
I
an easy review to write because it's all from the heart and it was a beautiful, wonderful book.
Cool. Well, it was so lengthy too. And the when you said you called it a memoir for the ages, and you called it a captivating memoir of her life and radio music, which I thought was wonderful. And I adored it when you said you'll love every page and wish for more. Because what people tell me who read it is they usually read books a few pages at a time and then pick it up the next day or next week or something. But they tell me that with my book, they wanted to sit there and read it all at once because they didn't want to put it down.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel great.
And I really do commend you for not pulling any punches either. You know, you told us the highs, the lows of your life, of the music business, and it wasn't just a sugar-coated account. It was, hey, listen, I did this, I did that, and it was just we knew we were reading about someone who was writing from the heart and who wasn't bullshitting us, if you don't mind my French.
Absolutely. And I did tell the truth definitely in my book. And that made it a little harder to write, I have to admit, because sometimes I thought, oh gosh, what if people cringe when they read this? But they don't. They totally understand because nobody's life is perfect, you know? They
Absolutely.
relate to me.
And we thank, we appreciate you for bringing us into that too. And it just gets us so more involved in the overall story.
Thank you.
Um, there are so many things in your book that you mentioned and people. And I wondered if I could just go down a list of names that you've mentioned because we could talk for hours and hours here. But because there's just so much to talk about. But could I just go down a list of people that you've mentioned in the book, and you can give us a little thumbnail and little background about those people?
I'll do my best.
Okay. All right. David Bowie, you mentioned in your book.
Well, David Bowie was a huge idol of mine because the first time I saw David Bowie was actually the exact same couple of weeks where I first saw the Rolling Stones. Um,
Wow.
a very good, yes, a very good friend of mine in high school's father was a huge TV producer, and he got his son two incredible front row seats for David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust concert at the Long Beach Arena. So my friend Brian took me to that, and it was an incredible concert. And I fell madly in love with David Bowie from the minute I first heard him on KMET FM months before. And then seeing him live was incredible because he kept changing his clothes and putting on all these great outfits. And then he sang a song that I hadn't heard before that he'd recently recorded that became my absolute favorite David Bowie song, the Jean Genie, which I still listen to and dance around to my house all the time.
So infectious, isn't it, Laurie? That's
Yeah.
yeah.
So David Bowie is one of the musicians that I've seen the most in my entire life. And it was so sad that he passed away. And one of my favorite David Bowie concerts was when I was living in New Zealand. I got to go see him in Wellington there, the first concert he'd done there in years and years. And it was an incredible show. It was on Valentine's Day in 2004. And even though it was a big outdoor show and it happened to be raining, he was wonderful and just so talented. And that was
Yeah.
one of the last times I saw him.
I don't know if you feel this way, Laurie, but I've always felt this way. Music, rock music is my life, really. I love it. It's gotten me through so many different times of my life. And when there are some people that think, like when you say David Bowie, he is to me, a musical genius. Um, but there are some people that might think, it's only rock music. It's not that much work. It's that couldn't be any further from the truth. You, especially having lived it, do you are you with me on that? That it's just such a tough life, and it's a great gift to have to be able to be a rock musician
And a rock star.
and
I mean,
a rock star. Absolutely.
yeah, it takes so much to be not only just talented, but to get your record company to really promote you and to get fans and to get played and to be wonderful live in concert. And not only have I dated and been friends with plenty of musicians, but I've also had a recording studio. So I've been with and seen so many bands other than really famous ones too, which is one reason why I've been to so many rock venues, not just huge ones, but small ones, especially when they used to have plenty more here in LA. It was so cool. And everywhere I've lived, I've seen tons of concert, sometimes every night.
It's what a life. I mean, I reading your book, the other crap you went through early on in your life, but what a way to spend your life, a good portion of your life. Now, it's impossible for you to tell me, but would you say you've been to 1,000 shows in your life?
Much more.
Much more.
Much more than 1,000. And I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of different bands because, like I said, so many of my friends are in bands
Mhm.
and I go see them everywhere they play and that sort of thing. And I was also married to a musician who played around a lot and took me to see lots of our friends as well. And it's just been incredibly cool for me. I've just had so much opportunity, and I still go to so many concerts, and I'm so excited because coming up, just in a few months now, we're going to go see my husband and I the Steve Miller Band again, which is one
Oh,
of my
that's lovely.
all-time favorites, and one of my friends' bands is named after part of his song. And their band is called the Midnight Tokers, and they're one of my favorite
Right.
local
Yes.
bands as
Yes.
well. And they've done a lot of albums as well too. And
May
I'm
I?
going to go see the Psychedelic Furs also in September, and I just have so much to look forward to. Everyone else from Jefferson Starship to the Blue Oyster Cult, Heart, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, and of course, Patti Smith with my friend Lenny Kaye, who was my neighbor in New York.
You
And we
you
have
must have you must have been asked more than a couple of times if you're related to Lenny Kaye, right? Laurie Kaye?
we're not related, but we have similar names. And
Right.
that's why, being neighbors, we got each other's mail and phone calls. So that's how we became friends. And
Hmm.
then when he came out to LA to do his book launch and signing, he did it at Book Soup, where I did my book launch and signing afterwards as well. So it's been great to be friends with him and to see him play with Patti Smith. And I've also, of course, in the past few years, seen Elvis Costello, the Black Angels, Buddy Guy, Steely Dan, John Fogerty, um, the Blind Boys, Alabama, Black Keys, Lawrence Juber, Bob Dylan, and Willie Nelson. I love seeing Bob Dylan. I tell the story in my book about my very first time seeing Bob Dylan. It was a great, great, probably his greatest concert, actually. And the Wailing Souls, Roxy Music, AC/DC, I just recently saw, and again, and we go see the A La La's fairly often. They're a fairly recent band,
Laurie,
so it's been
I
great.
I know you just got done pouring your heart and soul into this book, but I see at least another book or two in your future. From all of the, do you see maybe in the future I have to write about all these shows I've been to, and can you see that?
Maybe someday I will. I
Yes,
just have
yes.
to really keep working on this book now in terms
Of
of
course, of course.
promotion and getting it to people.
The late great Dick Clark. You really played a big part in his life, his professional life.
I was just having so much fun working for him. And it was after, just a few years after John Lennon's assassination. And he was just magnified by hearing that I had done that last interview. And so that was incredible. But also, I had met Dick Clark years before, after I'd graduated high school. And the story's in my book about how I took part in a dance contest for Dick Clark with a date of mine who wanted to win the contest because It was for a commercial for a Dick Clark series of rock specials for ABC, and we did end up winning the contest. And Dick Clark was super complimentary, and there's a picture of that in my book
Yes,
also.
absolutely. Was
And
Chubby Checker as well, right? If I recall.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. And Chubby Checker said, "Are you a professional dancer?" And I said, "You're the reason I learned to dance, thanks to the twist when I was a little kid."
Hmm.
And he laughed at that. And when I was hired by the producer of Dick Clark's weekly radio countdown show to go work, and then I met Dick, he looked at me and he said, "Oh my God, I recognize you. You're the contest winner from years ago." And it had been several years before. And he went to his shelf and took out a picture of me and my date and him and Chubby Checker and said, "See, Laurie, I still have it." And that was great. So I became great friends with Dick Clark, and he was so pleased with my writing that he almost immediately asked me, begged me to ghostwrite his weekly newspaper column that he just didn't have time to write. It was nationally syndicated, but he was so busy with his TV show and other things that he said, "If you write it for me, you can go to lots of concerts. You can write it as though you were me." And I said, "Oh, and pretend to be you." And he laughed and said, "Yes." And I did. And that was wonderful. And
What a
then
feather in your cap that
it
he chose
was.
you to do his weekly column. Yes.
And he also asked me to ghostwrite his memoir, his book, which I really wanted to do, but unfortunately, I was so busy that I just didn't have time to do it. And I wish I had, all these years
Or he
later.
understood.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but he did understand.
Yeah.
And I actually left just a couple years later, and that's when I wanted to get started in TV production. So that was my outlet to that.
Mm. Peter Tork of the Monkees.
Yes, I had a great contact with him. I was a Monkees fan, definitely, when I was in school. And as I don't know if I mentioned already, but my mother never listened to anybody or watched anybody on TV or anywhere other than Frank Sinatra. So that's the reason that I couldn't watch the Beatles on Ed Sullivan when I was a kid at home. I had to go to my aunt's house to watch them there with her and my cousins. And the same with the Monkees TV show. I had to either watch it at friend's house or lock myself in a room in the apartment to
Oh,
watch it by
brother.
myself. But I loved the Monkees. And then years later, when I was back in LA and I had a part-time job at a Santa Monica outdoor shopping center, I was walking back to the apartment after that, and I got called over by a really good-looking guy. And I looked at him and I gasped, and he introduced himself. He said, "Yes, I'm Peter Tork from the Monkees." And he started talking to me really sweetly and saying that he was going to be at a show that night at the Troubadour in West Hollywood and asked me if I wanted to go. And he ended up putting me on his guest list, which was so cool. So I got to go
Sure
see him
was.
in that show. And that was a great meetup right there.
Laurie, all due respect to your husband, but you could have been Laurie Tork. You played your cards right, or if he played his cards right, I should say.
I don't know about that because I was young and he was already in his 30s then, So being 18 or 19, whatever I was at the time, I think 18 still, probably I was too young for him to consider like that.
Did you have the Davy Jones stars coming out of your eyes like he did when he saw a girl on the show? All those romantic, ooh, those segments.
Perhaps, yes.
Do you think the monkey should be in the Hall of Fame? I do, absolutely. How about you?
Absolutely too. Yes. And I should say that my book actually is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame library, and they
Congratulations.
recommend it as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Laurie, with all these people we're talking about, and again, everyone, there's so much in the book that we not even touching here, but you'll love it. You you have interviewed three Beatles. How about starting with George Harrison? Can you tell us that story?
Well, George Harrison was my very first former Fab Four member interview. And it was thrilling for me because I'd always just been so fascinated by George Harrison the entire time I was growing up because I loved his interest in India. And I just really loved watching him on TV on Ed Sullivan and seeing him live. And it was a phone call interview at the radio station KFRC where I was working. And the really cool thing was it was for two big, lengthy RKO radio specials that I was writing. The first was RKO Presents the Beatles, which was being expanded at that point to 17 from 14 hours. And then I was also writing the top 100 of the 70s for RKO and Drake Chenault. So I got to interview George Harrison for that. And plus, it took place in December 1978, right after George had married Olivia, which was right after they had their son Danny. So he was so thrilled with being a house husband and
Yeah.
being a daddy. And he made a point of telling me how much he loved gardening in their backyard at home. And it was just everything we talked about was so cool. And he kept saying to me, I can't wait to come and see you in person and be interviewed again.
Oh boy,
And
wonderful boy.
yeah, it was great.
I hear so much, I'll read so much that the Beatles were really such humble people, relatively speaking, from all they've been through. And it's so nice to hear about the conversation you had with George that he seemed to be a humble person.
Absolutely. And I do have a lot of quotes in my book.
Yep.
And so, and also in the audiobook, you can hear quotes that I used actual bites, some of, not all of them in the book,
Nice.
but but you can hear all of
Now
the
you see,
Fab Four members.
just for that, I have to get the audiobook now as well. How is it to write an audio, oh, right, to vocalize an audiobook, by the way? Is it tough work?
Well, it is tough work. A lot of people have a much tougher time because they don't voice it themselves. But of course, I did. And
Mhm.
not only that, but I have a recording studio. So I got to record it in there with a producer who was a tenant of mine. And so he recorded it. And then we hired somebody to put in the interview bites that I chose and to make sure that it was just in good shape and everything. And it seems to be pretty popular. So
About
everybody really likes it.
about how many sessions did it take you to complete the whole book?
It definitely took several months. It
Yeah, I
took
would
at
imagine.
least three or 4 months
Mhm.
because he was busy a lot, and of course, so was I. So we couldn't do it every
Yeah,
day.
sure. It's not totally all day long you're doing the book. Absolutely.
Right. And some things I read over and over because I wanted to read them better and make them sound better and sound more excited. So hopefully it worked out.
Yeah, the life of a voice actor, really, when you think.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
yeah. I realized I kind of jumped over this when we mentioned the Rolling Stones. If we can just go back a second, you had a really great phone conversation with Mick Jagger.
Ah,
Can
that
you hear
interview was
that?
incredible. And it was also for the top 100 of the 70s. And when Mick Jagger called, I said, Oh, Mick, do you want me to call you back? Or you can call me back because I'm just about to go on the air and do a newscast. And he said, No, keep me on the phone. I'll listen to you. And I said, Are you sure? And he said, Yeah. And so it made me really nervous, but I did my newscast. And afterwards, I got back on the phone with him and he said, You sounded great. Those were great stories. And he was so complimentary. It made me ever since then just feel like yes, I am talented. Mick
Yeah.
appreciated me.
Well, just speaking as a reader of your book, You didn't need Mick Jagger to tell you that because the talent that you bring forth in this book is it's a book within itself. Even if you took John out, we never would want to do that. But this book could stand alone as just a music tome. It's just wonderful.
Well, thank you. I think most of the fans are rock music fans, which
Mhm.
is great. Rock, pop, reggae, everything,
Yeah.
blues, you name it. And they're also fans of memoirs and reading about people's lives and how they got through really hard times and made their lives work out well. So
Yeah.
hopefully it does what it's supposed to.
I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, maybe pun intended, being speaking about music, but again, you really lay it all out there in this book. And as a reader, it tells me, you know what, Laurie is totally vested in this book. And I just I like you were mentioning before, I couldn't put it down. It was just, oh my gosh, what's next? What's next? What's next? And when I got to the end, it was like, there's got to be more. There's got to be more. I know she's got more to tell, but I'm very satisfied with the book. Don't get me wrong. But you leave us with the impression that, wow, you've had such a rich life in music and radio that there's probably so much more when you get the time to tell.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, George Harrison is one Beatle. We've got two to go. Paul and Linda and Denny Lane. How about that in-person meeting?
Well, that was incredible because I got sent to London with my RKO team, Dave Sholin, the co-interviewer, and Ron Hummel, the producer engineer. Um, we got sent to London to interview Paul and Linda and their latest lineup of Wings, and Denny Lane, who I was a huge fan of, and Lawrence Juber, who was a very recent Wings member. And
What a talented musician he is, huh?
absolutely. And then I got to see him again after all these years. We did the interview in London in June in 1979. And then in 1974, I got to see Lawrence Juber again at the Fest for Beatles fans and show him my book and talk to him and
Mhm.
meet up with him. And it was just really cool. And Paul and Linda uh, interview was great. The Wings members were great. And it was the first time I'd been to England, so I was really excited to be there. And it was an incredible interview, and I was such a huge fan of Paul's and of Linda's,
Mhm.
and it was just great to be able to talk to them about everything from music and recording and writing songs and playing live to raising their family
Mhm.
and all
Things
that.
that they
It's
would love
great.
to talk about, the domestic part of their lives, I'll bet. They love to talk about
Absolutely.
that. You
All
know,
their kids, yeah.
I know it's a cliche, but sometimes I have trouble remembering what I ate for breakfast yesterday. But can you remember when the first time, like, I don't know, did you walk in a room and Paul and Linda were there? But do you remember the first time you set eyes live on Paul McCartney, the feeling you had? Is there any way to remember that or
Yeah,
relate?
I felt like I was a little kid again seeing Beatles live at Dodger Stadium. It's like, oh my God, this is great. And
How
of
did you
course I
stay
told,
cool? How did you stay cool? I would have been
well, I barely did. And
like,
it was so exciting. Not only when Paul gave me autographs and gave me a copy of Linda's book of photography that had come out fairly recently, but he hugged me and kissed me, and it was just great. And being so close to Linda too, and it was just an amazing interview. And then, as I also say in my book, we got to smoke pot with them too, and that was incredible.
yeah,
All
but
of it together.
I was going to say, didn't you bring some a beverage for them too that they appreciated?
Yes, we brought, it had been my idea to bring a bottle for Paul of his very favorite booze, and he was thrilled. And so he had Linda take the box out with pot and start rolling joints for us. And that's when we started smoking. So it was a lot of fun.
How comfortable you must have made them feel as an interviewer. They must have, kind of always been reserved when they talk. Can I trust this person, this person? You must have hit it off right away with them, and they probably felt so comfortable. And I'm not surprised just from speaking with you now how comfortable you make people feel as an interviewer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, and I was thinking about it too. Linda and Denny Lane both left us. Both are gone. You must,
Sadly,
yeah, I
yes.
mean, not to get morbid, but you must really have lost a lot of people you knew and friends in the industry. So I can just imagine, how you feel every time you hear something like that. But
Yeah. That's why I'm so happy to still have Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr
no,
alive, the two living former Four members.
my wife and I are going to see Ringo at Radio City Music Hall in a couple of weeks. So
Awesome. Have a great time.
we've seen him forever. Yeah, thank you. We've seen him. I've seen him many, many times because he's Ringo. Yeah,
Sure.
Ringo.
Yeah.
You know,
I've
you
seen him too. Yeah.
yeah, always a good show.
Hmm.
You mentioned that you had seen the Beatles at Dodger Stadium. Again, I couldn't remember it if it happened to me, but what do you remember about seeing the Beatles live? And do you have the ticket?
Well, first of all, it wasn't my ticket. It was a friend of mine's birthday in elementary school, and her mother really sweetly bought a few tickets to the Dodger Stadium show and took her daughter and just a few of her friends with her. So I never had a ticket, and we didn't take any pictures. And to be very honest, we had really, really high seats way up at the top of the stadium. And all of the other attendees were pretty much, it seemed like teenage girls jumping and screaming the whole time and singing along. But it was still an amazing concert. And I
You have the
remember
whole
just
music.
having such a great time. So even though I don't have a ticket still or anything like that, I definitely remember going.
Here, your ticket's in your heart, right here, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Laurie, I just have to share this with you. When you were just telling me that little story there about how, your friend's mom bought tickets, that must have like broken your heart in a way that why couldn't my mother do things like this for me? You must have felt that a lot growing up.
Well, I talk in my book
Good.
about my dysfunctional mother who never wanted to get pregnant in the first place because the husband she had pretty much just married left her the minute he found out he was that she was pregnant, and so she had to raise me and her parents, who she wasn't happy to be raised by necessarily, moved out from Michigan to raise me with her, and we lived with them. And it was definitely being raised by a dysfunctional family, even though my grandparents were much more comfortable to be with and everything.
Yes. Mhm.
But still, my mother wasn't, and she didn't really want to have anything to do with me, and she never encouraged me. And she just wanted to get married to somebody who had a lot of money and could take care of her and somehow get rid of me. And she did marry a guy, but no, he wasn't rich and he didn't care about me at all. And they both tried to discourage me from going to college and from doing well in school because my mother never
Oh my
did.
goodness. Gee.
Yeah, so I spent most of my time, to be honest, staying still with my grandparents
Mhm.
and with my aunt and her family and with all my friends' families in junior high and high school. And then I was finally able to run away from home and then go to college and pretty much be on my own. And my mother was never encouraging about my career when she found out what I'd done, and she never ever listened to any of the specials, even when they played in LA that I'd written.
What a
And
shame.
when she was in San Francisco for a visit, she never listened to me on the air. And yeah, she just didn't care. Just wasn't her thing.
I mean, I'm so sorry that you went through that, but I'm also so happy that you've lived such a rich life in spite of that. So I just feel good for you now.
Thank you. Well, I do. I use the word blame my mother, but on the other hand, I also give her credit for being who I am. So because if she hadn't been who she was, who knows if I would have had all the opportunities that I do.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of like,
I
would you change anything? You probably would, but a lot, you like you said, you might not have been here. I have a feeling you would have because of
Right.
your talent anyway. But yes, I understand completely what you're saying. It may not have happened if it hadn't been what happened.
And my mother and I actually became friends in her last couple of years on Earth because her creepy husband left her and then was dead, and I had to take care of her and make sure she was doing okay. So I would go down to San Diego and do that, and it was nice to get to know her, even though she never really asked about me and what I was doing. I got to spend time with her, so that
Well,
made me feel better.
yes, there is some happiness there at least, however late or whatever. And like I said when we started out, Laurie, I think the main draw is John, your interview with John. But again, there's just so much more in the book that everyone's going to love. And before we get to your meeting with John, how can we get your book? The usual sources, and why don't you tell us?
Absolutely everywhere online, from Amazon to bookstore websites to Walmart, you name it, it's all available there. And it's available in some libraries too. And it's, of course, available in stock in a lot of bookstores, everywhere from Barnes and Noble to Waterstones in the UK. And
Mhm.
people can get it anywhere. And if they want to, they can go to my website, which is confessionsofarockandrollnamedropper.com. And there's a segment in it called Purchase that will show you where and give you links to get there online and tell you stores. And also, you can contact me if you want to get it from me and have me autograph it for you. I can sell it to you and sign it for you personally. So
No, that's the way to go, everybody. I mean, I ordered mine from Amazon, but I would love to have Lori autograph a book. Consider that, everyone.
thank you. I hope they go to the website because they can also listen to plenty of my podcasts, see me on TV shows, read a lot about
Yeah,
me
we
and my
have
book.
we have the website right on screen now as we talk. So everyone,
Cool.
please visit. Um, Maybe talk about John Lennon. You're meeting with John and Yoko. And again, I'm going to be asking you throughout this some crazy Beatlemaniac questions. So forgive me for that, but please, I'm going to throw it over to you. How did all this come about? And just an amazing chapter in your life.
It was really cool to be able to be sent to New York by RKO Radio with, again, my RKO team, Dave Sholin and Ron Hummel, and also the executive from Warner Brothers, Bert Keane, who recently passed away, sadly. So the four of us got to be with John and Yoko for hours that day, December 8th, 1980, mere hours before he was shot and killed, sadly. And it was an amazing interview, and I just loved being validated and complimented by John the whole time. And he sat next to me when he came in the office. We'd been there with Yoko a little bit before because John was still upstairs taking pictures for Rolling Stone, pictures on his own. And when he came down, he sat down right next to me on the love seat in front of the coffee table and just pushed his glasses down his face and looked at me and said hello. And then every time he liked my questions or comments, he would say, "Yes, Lori, exactly, love." And
Oh,
it just made
Lord.
me feel so great. And especially when um, we started, we were talking for the most part in the beginning about him being a house husband and a daddy of his 5-year-old son, Sean, who he basically called his twin since they had the same birthday. And he felt great about that. And, but finally I said, John, I want to ask you about getting the urge to make music again, because of course they just recorded and
Oh,
released Double Fantasy. And I emphasized that. And John burst in with this super loud, funny, and affectionate reply saying, "Oh, it came over me all of a sudden, love. I don't know what came over me." And everyone laughed while I reacted confidently to his endearing response. I said, "I know." I said, "It was like you were possessed." And he said, "Yes, I was possessed by this rock and roll devil." And we all laughed
I
again.
so remember that. Of course, I had it on cassette tape, but yes.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that as we laughed again and John kept talking about creating double fantasy along with Yoko, he said, "Just suddenly I had, like, if you'll pardon the expression, a diarrhea of creativity." So
It's
that was great to think of. And it just made
typical
me,
John.
yeah, so happy to be talking to him for hours more.
All right, so here's Beatlemaniac nutty question number one. When he sat down on the couch next to you, did you guys happen to maybe touch legs or something? Did you touch? I mean, I know the picture afterward, but I mean, when he sat down, were you saying, "Ooh, I'm close to John. I wonder if I did that happen?"
Well, it wasn't anything weird because, of
Oh,
course,
no, I don't
Yoko
mean it that
was
way. I
too,
certainly don't mean it that way. Yeah.
And he and Yoko were very much in love, and Yoko explained that their relationship was a spiritual bond that was bigger than the both of them together. And that was so great because they'd gotten back together again
Yes.
after being separated, and that was wonderful. And
Last weekend, yeah.
I just I did end up, touching John and hugging him, and the cool thing was that John and Yoko and the rest of us all made plans to get together in the next couple of weeks. They were going to be in San Francisco on their way to Hawaii, and they said, "Yes, let's all go eat dinner together at Yoko's favorite Japanese restaurant in San Francisco." So I was so excited because, as much as I loved the interview and the questions about music and everything, I couldn't wait to talk to them more about relationships because I really needed help working on relationships because I hadn't had any lengthy long-term ones.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk to John more about all the things we had in common because not only were we both not raised by our parents,
Yeah.
but also we both just loved our stays on Bali. And even though I lived there longer, he was there mostly for vacation. He talked about it as though it was one of the most incredible places he'd ever been to. So I was dying to talk to him about that again. And of course, sadly, we did not get to meet up again because he was assassinated.
Yeah. Again, everyone, it's so much. Lori tells so much in detail of the interview and everything, and then things took a few hours later. Things took a very dark turn that you are still battling inwardly about. Could you share with that before we end up?
Well,
Well,
I should tell you what happened, and that was towards the end of the interview. Yoko was getting calls saying that her limo driver wasn't going to be available to take her and John to the recording session that they had that evening. So she asked us if we could take them. And the guys that I was with were going to the airport that night to go back to the West Coast. I wasn't going back. I was staying the night in New York to be with a friend of mine. And they said, "Yes, of course we will." So when the interview was over and after they'd given us incredible autographs, by the way, one of them is in the book that I brought with me, Great
aha,
Yoko's book.
sure.
And John and Yoko autographed it both for me. John begged me to let him autograph it too, since he'd written the introduction. And I said, "Yes, of course." And he said, "Great, because I love it when people autograph their books for me." And I said, Wow, John. Well, if and when I ever write a book, I'll definitely autograph and send it to you. And he said, Great, I can't wait. So that immediately convinced me to write a book right there.
Yeah,
That's
I would
the main
imagine.
reason I did. But so
That was
after
your
John,
impetus. That was your impetus.
yes,
Yeah.
so after John autographed my book with Yoko, um, and we took a picture together. And by the way, I put the autograph that they did in my book, so people have
Yes.
it for themselves now too, as well as our picture together. And so we took the picture, and then I and the guys walked out of the Dakota. While John and Yoko were getting ready to leave too, a minute later, because the guys were going to drop them off at the recording
Right.
studio in the limo that we'd taken there. And as we walked out, this creepy guy started bugging me, saying, Did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph? What'd he say? And I just tried to ignore him. But what happened was Bert Keane, the Warner Brothers executive, gave the guy a copy of Double Fantasy, thinking that it would shut him up. And then when John and Yoko came out, he asked John to autograph it for him. So John did. And there was a picture taken by a different photographer of him autographing it. And then when he was done, we all hugged goodbye, me and John and Yoko, and they got in the car with the guys and they drove the limo off to the recording studio. And I was waving goodbye. And I turned around to walk up the sidewalk to my friend's office, who I was going to be having dinner and spending the night with. And that creepy guy started following me and again saying over and over, Did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph? What'd he say? What'd he say? What'd he say? And I just tried to get rid of him and I kept telling him to leave me alone and he wouldn't. And he wouldn't stop following me. And I was acting like I was going to smack him, but I didn't. And
Wow. Yeah.
finally, after about a block, I got him to leave me alone and turn around. And I thought to myself, gee, I should really go back to the Dakota and tell those people there, in the security department to get rid of the guy because he's going to bug other people. But I didn't. I went to my friend's office and we went out to dinner. And then after dinner, we went back to his apartment. And as he was about to open the door, he said, When I open the door, you're going to hear music because I leave the radio on in case anybody tries to break in. They'll think that I'm here, so they'll go away. So he opened the door, but it wasn't music. A reporter came on and said, John Lennon was shot. And I screamed, and he said, He's in the hospital. And so I immediately ran out to the middle of the street and I took a cab to the Roosevelt Hospital where the reporter had said that John was. And I looked in the big glass front door and I saw Yoko holding on to a friend and sobbing hysterically. And I realized, oh my God, John no doubt wasn't just shot. He was probably killed. He's probably dead, even though the reporter hadn't said that yet. And I didn't want to walk in. Knew I'd make you feel terrible and reminder why they were in town that day. So instead, I went to the phone booth next door and I called the RKO Radio New York office and told them what was going on. And they said, Oh my God, come immediately to our headquarters here. And I did. And I ended up spending the night there, not sleeping, but doing interviews the whole time with um, um, reporters all over the country, radio and print reporters, and also some in England and other places. And then at one point, we turned on the TV to see if anything else had been announced. And sure enough, that's when they announced, no, John just wasn't just shot, he was killed. And this is the guy who admitted doing it. And they showed him after he had been arrested. And it was the guy who'd followed me and bugged me. And so I immediately felt guilty. And I have felt guilty for nearly 45 years now that I didn't report him to the security team at the Dakota because not only could they have gotten rid of him or maybe called the police, but maybe they would have looked at him carefully, more carefully than I did, and seen that he had a gun in the pocket of the coat that he was wearing, which I, of course, didn't. So I felt
Okay.
really bad. And then the next morning, the morning after John was shot, I was put on the Today Show, and that segment is on my website as well. And I just felt terrible, not only because I hadn't slept all night, but because I was crying and guilty feeling and so sad. And then I immediately, after the Today Show, flew back to the West Coast, San Francisco, and started immediately listening to the interview that I had a copy of, our interview with John and Yoko, and writing the radio special that originally I wasn't going to write and wasn't going to air until Valentine's Day in
Yeah, a couple of months, yeah.
next year, but we needed to have me write it and air it right away. So I wrote it really fast and called it John Lennon, the Man, the Memory, and dedicated it to Yoko Ono, of course. And it aired 6 days after John was shot and killed, the same day that Yoko had the 10-minute silence
Right.
for John.
Yeah.
And ever since then, it's just been difficult for me.
And you bring that forth so well in the book as well. And I just a couple of quick things. I commend you for not mentioning the scum's name who murdered John.
I never do, and I never print it. I don't want to give them publicity, ever.
And a couple of things I want our audience to know. We had scheduled an interview before this, but I had to cancel or postpone. Laurie was nice enough to redo her schedule for me, and I can't thank you enough for that. Also, everyone, Laurie is sick today, and the show must go on. She came on like a real trooper, and I would never know you were sick. You lay down after this or whatever you have to do, but thank you so much for giving your time. And the book is wonderful. You're wonderful, and I just can't thank you enough for being on, Laurie.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. And thank you so much for recommending that everybody else reads it too, because I can't wait not only to hear how much they totally dig it, but also hopefully they'll leave me 5-star online reviews as well.
Please, reviews mean so much to the author, and 5 stars isn't enough, Laurie, but that's all they would allow me to give. So I hope someday we can talk again for whatever reason. But it's
Me
been
too.
a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. Take care now.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, put the red light off. This is Johnny Rhythm just saying good night to you all, and God bless you.
All right, well, that's got it done then. What are we going to do now?
Has he turned it off?
I think he has. Have you turned it off, lad?
Hey, Basher. And they're still the same.
Turned it off, Basher.